Look at these 3 words written larger than the rest, with a special pride never written before or since. Tall words proudly saying, "We the people."
Welcome to the Lex Rex Institute podcast. I'm your host, David Truschel.
I'm your co-host, Alexander Haberbush, and we've got a third person with us here again today. Alex, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Alex Bostic. I am a legal assistant at the Lex Rex Institute.
Yep, you guys may remember Alex from a few episodes ago when we were talking about Rome, and that's what we're doing here again today. So, as our resident Roman history buff, he has rejoined us for this conversation.
So I listened to last week's episode, David. Good job on that, by the way. Sorry I wasn't there to help you out.
Well, I won't particularly vouch for the quality, being just me talking about the pilgrims for about 12 minutes. But
Well, religious liberty is a very important subject. I'd actually really been looking forward to doing that episode, but a few really big things came up. Next year, as part of our program, we are going to do a full hour-long episode about the pilgrims and religious liberty. But listen to David's. He does a great job. It's really hard to do stuff by yourself. I used to do that on our Ask an Attorney segments. I don't envy that at all. Thank you so much for doing that, David.
Yeah, I'm not going to be volunteering to do that again anytime soon if we can avoid it. So
Fair enough.
All right.
And before we begin, just remember that we have extended our matching grant program. Our donor who has agreed to match all donations to LexRex has extended that through the end of the year, so you're not too late. Now is the time to donate to LexRex if you've not done so in the past. That is one of the very best ways that you can join the fight to support and defend our Constitution. Really, every penny that you give us goes directly to the defense of liberty, to our clients' cases, and defending the Constitution. All right, so do we want to jump straight in?
I think we do.
Yeah, great, cool.
The good old Roman music.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
There we go.
Rome, eternal city.
Yeah.
I don't know. What else do you say about Rome?
Well,
That's 7 hills. And on those have 7 hills were 7 gables, and on those 7 gables, 7 brothers, and each of the 7 brothers, 7 wives, and how many people were walking to St. Ives?
I've never heard that before.
It's from, I think, Die Hard 3, the one with
That's
Jeremy
why I
Irons
heard
in
it. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
I have not seen that movie, but I want to point out. So
I obviously changed it, but
we've been calling this series "The Fall of Rome," and I want to point out it is still technically fall. It will still technically be fall when this episode is released.
Oh, it's a
Winter's about 2.5 weeks away. So
are you done with us, Alex? You're going to leave in rage
No,
that we would have a pun on this?
incredibly disappointed.
I've pointed out that it's a pun several times, and I've also pointed out that despite the fact that I hate puns as well, I came up with it. So really, you can
fair.
blame me, and I blame myself. But
Okay.
It's
I'll do
catchy,
that.
I think it works.
today, though, we're going to be talking about sort of the very...
Well, what did we cover last time first? So what do we know about Rome so far? If you've watched our previous episodes or listened to them, since you can't watch them, although I think we're going to be uploading video from now on. Is that right, David?
At some point, at least, and we can get into that a bit later after we let Alex go. There are going to be a few changes to the format. But at some point...
Yep, so stay tuned.
At some
We're
point...
going to let you guys know what Season 2 will be like. We'll be introducing that a little bit later, so stay tuned. But yeah, if you listen to past episodes, what you've learned about Rome so far is...
Well, the first one we did of these, we covered their voting system and how it's a little convoluted and how some problems with voting are perennial.
Ladies of the Lake holding forth Excalibur.
Not quite.
Yeah.
Not quite that. Yeah.
Not quite that opaque, but not all that far off
Do they
either.
take turns as a sort of executive leader for the week?
That's closer. But
That's closer. That's a lot closer. Yeah.
Actually, that is close. Executive
year.
leader for the year.
Yeah.
Of the year. Yeah.
But anyway, and in the second episode, which is the first time that we had Alex on to join us, we talked about the Gracchi brothers and all the shenanigans they got up to and how they sort of exposed some of the cracks in the system. And today we're going to be talking about how those cracks got a whole lot worse and shattered the Roman Republic.
Yeah. So, yeah, sort of abusing, as we mentioned, a lot of ad hoc positions that were created over time in the Roman Constitution. Because remember, no written constitution. It's a constitution of basically tradition and precedent.
Right.
But because there's a lot of ad hoc positions where the powers are not strictly defined, people act sort of at the peripheries of that power, and that exposes weaknesses in the Roman superstructure. And specifically, that happens with the position of
Tribune.
the tribune,
Yeah.
right? Tribune of the people, who are supposed to have veto power. They abuse that veto power. That exposes problems. Everybody gets murdered. Problems dealt with for now.
Right.
Yeah.
But join us next week, and we'll see what happens. And now we're at next week, so what happens?
Well, we're going to be focusing on two periods of civil war. First, which falls in the 80s BC between Gaius Marius and Sulla, who has first names, but no one ever uses them.
Correct.
And then the second between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. Pompey, who also has other names, but again, nobody uses them. He's Pompey the Great. For the record, for people who are interested in doing some reading on this, I'm relying for a lot of this material on a book called SPQR by Mary Beard. That's a pretty good book. I don't think everything.
You put Beard in a bunch of our notes. I thought it might be Charles Beard. I'm glad that it's not.
No.
He's the famous Marxist historian.
No, this is Mary Beard. I can't recommend everything about the book, but it's pretty good, and it takes you, through a lot of Roman history in about 500 pages. So it's pretty quick paced. So anyway, if you're interested, if you like to read history, you could do worse than that. Again, SPQR is the name of the book.
Stands for
the Senate and People of Rome, but in Latin, and I'm not going to try to give you that exact phrase in Latin. But anyway, one of the things that I think really sort of begins to spell the end of the Roman Republic is the way they dealt with, or really failed to deal with, changes to their military system. We talked about in the last episode we did on Rome how they had property requirements for military service. You had so much land, you were this kind of soldier. You have more land, you're this kind of soldier, and so on.
Right.
Problem was there were fewer and fewer people with enough property to qualify for military service. Rome is ever more interested in fighting foreign wars. And
wait, so you had to own land to be in the army? Is that what you're saying?
You had to be sufficiently wealthy, which at the time, and almost until basically the Industrial Revolution,
That's the only way you would have had those assets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't think it was
maybe a few people in Rome proper, but not very many.
Right.
Yeah. So, but for all intents and purposes, yes, you needed to own land.
Even to be like a common foot soldier.
Yeah, because you had to initially, the initial rule was you had to pay for your own arms,
Exactly.
so there has a minimum wealth requirement in order to be able to afford them.
Right.
So.
And this is becoming increasingly difficult.
This is Republican Rome, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is part of one of the reasons why Imperial Rome is the power that it is they don't have this requirement anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's early and mid-Republican Rome, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's where they talk about the Marian reforms of the military. That's Gaius Marius, who I mentioned a minute ago. He changed this.
Not different from the Maid Marian from Robin Hood.
Yes,
for those
quite
of you
different.
Who are wondering.
He's not a fox.
Different.
But
well, that's debatable.
well, okay. Anyway, so he changed the system in a way that I think had short-term benefits to the military and long-term huge problems for the Republic. Switched it.
Yeah, things that benefit militaries tend to have detrimental effects on Republican government. We talked about that before in our Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers' fear of standing armies, because what's an army? Well, it's a very powerful body of men who can potentially start telling other people what to do, right? So if you've got a representative government, doesn't necessarily have the same force that an army would, that presents a real danger. So go on, David.
Yeah. So Marius changed it, though, from requiring the legionaries to supply their own equipment to putting that responsibility on the general. The general needs to find the funds, needs to find a way to equip his men, and basically provide for the logistics. So
kind of the way the British did it with their navy up through even the Napoleonic Wars.
A bit, yeah.
Difference is you can have.
I'm sure that example was very helpful to most people.
But it is, it raises a good point, though, and this actually pertains to our Constitution as well. Navies work fundamentally differently than armies do. You can have a very effective navy with relatively little manpower. What you need is hardware.
Right.
And you build that and it stays around for a while. So we have a standing navy under our constitutional order in America in a way that we don't have a standing army. But
most wars in history, the people or the side with the most people wins.
Yeah, that was
that's
especially true for Rome, where maybe their number one strength was when they had an entire army annihilated, they just raised another one, and the enemy couldn't believe they were doing that.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, even into the Napoleonic era, I mean, that decided battles more often than not.
Very, very true. And, the Marian reforms, among other things, because they also changed the way the army was organized in a way that made it more effective and so on. But probably the main thing was suddenly you can actually make use of all the manpower that you have.
Right.
But
who pays for the swords?
The government.
Oh.
And
right, yeah.
more particularly...
Which means me. I pay for it, right?
Uh-huh.
And more particularly, the one actually paying it out, the one actually, directly administering all of it is the general himself. And that becomes a real problem. And that's another thing that the U.S. Constitution sort of exists to fix, insofar as it deals with the military.
Right, because who funds the military and constitutional government? House of Representatives, right? That's
right.
Same people that fund everything else.
Yeah.
Right.
And you've separated under the U.S. system funding from command. So the president...
And they also can't fund it indefinitely.
Right.
They can only fund it for limited periods of time, and it has to be renewed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But so anyway, you can see that the U.S. system has sort of tried to go out of its way to address a lot of the problems that arise from this period. But
and we've never had a military coup. We've never even had an attempted military coup. And I think that's a real credit to our system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like, military coups. That's for banana republics, so on and so forth. Well, there's a reason for that. It's not just a cultural difference in America. It really is because of those legal protections. Military coups really are a pretty great risk in most systems.
Virtually every country in the world has had numerous military coups in their history in some form or other.
Yep.
It's actually, pretty unique that America hasn't. Anyway, that's the thing that I think sort of represents the underlying problem with this whole era, this late Republic era, is military leaders have effectively become the biggest political players in town, and they're effectively outside legal control. And, we'll get into specifics on that.
Well, I think that the emphasis there should be the outside the legal control, right? Because we do that too in America. Like, what is it?
Eisenhower.
All but one or two presidents have had military service beforehand because it makes you more people like you more and make them want to vote for you, sort of thing. It's a
lot of them have
thing.
been generals too. We got Eisenhower, Grant,
but
Washington.
In our case,
so it's the emphasis
not while they are actively leading armies.
I can think of a lot more than two presidents that haven't had military experience, though.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, you just go through the first four presidents. I think 3 of them did.
Oh, fair. Yeah.
Yeah. It was there reached a.
I mean, I haven't gone through the rest of them mentally yet, but just now, it's a lot of them that have.
I think it was something like everyone in the 20th century until Clinton had.
Yeah, 20th century that did sort of change. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the.
Wait, did FDR have military experience? Yes, he did. He did.
He did, yeah. But
in the Navy, right?
Navy, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But the big difference there, though, is that you can't be at the head of an army while you're well, you could, I guess, in theory. Generally speaking, you couldn't be a general and a politician at the same time in the American system,
right.
Which is not true of Rome at all.
Mm-mm.
So, all right, what do we want to say about Marius, I guess?
Oh, a whole lot. Okay, so Marius kind of, so we talked about Gracchus last time about how he tried to fix a problem, and in so doing, he had a lot of bad solutions that had even worse responses, and it kind of helped fray or show the problems with the system, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, it's the classic quote, if the government, if you think the problems we create are bad, just wait till you see our solutions.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is a little bit of more of just a factoid, but Marius's first term in office was the year after Gaius Gracchus died. So he was living throughout all that stuff and probably very clearly taking a bit of notes because throughout his career, his main ploys seemed to be get really famous on the backs of someone else's work and then use the army in order to leverage more influence and fame. So the first time he became consul, it's because he was fighting under another general in Africa. He got permission to leave, went straight to Rome, and then claimed all of the credit for anything the other general did and said that he should be in charge instead. So then they voted him consul.
Wow, that doesn't sound at all familiar.
Right.
And, similar thing will sort of contribute to his rivalry with Sulla because Sulla was a junior officer in Marius's army and felt that Marius was stealing all of his glory as well a bit further down the road.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting because
he follows the same model.
In the same war, the war was ended by Sulla under Marius, and then Marius went back to Rome the same way he did before and took the credit for that.
Yeah.
So that's what started their rivalry, even. So yeah.
So Sulla originally serves under Marius.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
So Marius, what does he end up doing? What's his influence on the Republic? Obviously he takes credit for winning a bunch of wars. That catapults him into political prominence. And then once he's got political prominence, what does he do?
He mostly just stays in political prominence and uses other wars to do it again and again. Actually, he's famous for, I think, being consul 7 times, and I think six of them were in a row when it was illegal to have more than one without 1 year, at least 1 year in between them.
But they just didn't care because who's going to enforce it?
Because he kept using political influence. I think David has.
One of the things that went along with that was he kept telling this story about how, as a child, he found an eagle's nest with 7 eggs in it, and eagles normally only have, I think, 1 or 2 eggs in a clutch. And so it was like, this is clearly some kind of...
on these 7 hills were 7 eggs.
Yeah,
and...
some kind of symbolism that the gods had chosen him to be consul 7 times, and that was apparently convincing to some people.
That is the strangest thing I've ever heard. Why should you be our leader? Well, I saw an eagle's nest with 7 eggs once.
Yeah, it's
gosh, I'm picking that guy.
Better or worse than a strange woman in a pond holding a loftus sword.
Yeah.
Honestly, a little bit worse.
I tend to agree, yeah.
I mean, the Romans were a little bit into omens, but yeah, it's pushing it a bit.
And that's showing, the extent to which the Roman state religion was influencing politics at this time. I mean, we talked before about how the state basically was quasi-religious to the Romans.
Yeah.
That's why this kind of stuff ends up mattering. And, you see people nowadays in politics trying to capitalize on religion, doing things that are very similar. It's why even if someone might be very religious, but they shy away from some of the more religious rhetoric, because I think that, blurring those lines isn't always helpful. But
Yeah.
And have you guys talked about the Novus Homo or the Circus Honorum a bit?
No.
Oh, okay. So briefly, because this matters in why Marius and Sulla kind of butted heads so much, is that Novus Homo just means new man. So it's poor people that are rising up through the ranks and taking jobs that patricians and i.e. nobles usually had. Marius is one of those guys. So a lot of old families were mad at him for that.
Sounds like the Industrial Revolution.
A bit like that. Right. A bit like, we if you think about it, you can think of plenty of times in history that's happened.
Sure.
And then Circus Honorum, meaning the basically the honor circuit of honors, of meaning political offices that made people famous. And really the thing that kind of drove a lot of political power or people wanting high office in Rome was to get famous from that. It's sort of part of the religion of the Greeks and Romans that fame matters for your immortality as a person.
So the Novo Homo sounds kind of like the 20th century concept of the nouveau riche.
Exactly.
We don't like these people getting uppity, taking positions they didn't have previously. They're all showboating. They want attention. It sounds like the kind of slurs you've heard.
Yeah, it's basically one-to-one to
before.
that. Yeah. Basically one-to-one to that. And more important is the Circus Honorum, because Marius kept pushing, illegally, by the way, pushing people out of all of the best and coolest spots. No one that otherwise would get those spots, who, as I said earlier when he was stealing their credit, deserved them, was being pushed out. And it really came to a head after the social war, which we don't have to get into, but that's pretty much a very short, very, very bad civil war that the Romans had, that Sulla basically won for them. We've talked about it a little bit in the previous episode. It was a short, brutal civil war. And so, of course, because he won then the social war, he won the next election as consul. Marius apparently didn't like that. He wanted his 7th consulship. So he hired a bunch of thugs, marched into Rome, and forced them to make him consul instead.
So what does he do? He marches right into the Senate? Or...
Historians are a little bit vague on that part, on the how, but he essentially just...
Yeah, records typically aren't great during political coups. The guy that's writing stuff down tends to run away from his seat. And
he pulls basically 2 different tricks. A, he uses a bunch of influence from people he knows that like him. And B, he hires a bunch of thugs to stop people from voting if they don't like him. So
I see. So he actually goes around and influences the vote.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
To reissue the vote, make him consul instead. And Sulla isn't having this. He's finally fed up. He's fed up with this because they've been rivals for like decades now, and he marches into Rome with an army. And now that's a new change entirely. People haven't marched into Rome. They've just threatened people with weapons before.
Yeah, going into Rome's a big deal. Yeah, so they storm the Capitol, and then
they didn't have to storm it. They just marched right in because people weren't expecting that, right?
The media would have called it storming the Capitol.
Sure.
I'm certain of that.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's what press would call storming the Capitol. And then, so Sulla runs away, of course, and Marius runs away, and Sulla essentially just says, "No, go back to what was legal. I'm consul now." So, and it took him about a year to do that, and then he left Rome. And Marius comes back with an actual army and kills everybody that were supporting Sulla.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of between these two guys. There's a lot of Marius coming in doing something bad, and Sulla coming in and systematizing what Marius did to a much worse way.
Yeah, I'm going to take everything you did to its logical conclusion.
Right. That's what Sulla does, like a lot. Go on.
Wow. So, like, generally, if you lose your coup d'etat, you're done. You know,
Right.
You don't usually come back a year later and slaughter everybody.
And the reason that was possible, and this is, really the reason why Sulla cared so much about who was in charge at that given moment, is that Sulla wanted to go fight a war in the Eastern Mediterranean against one of Rome's greatest enemies of the time, Mithridates. Which, that took a while to resolve. And he comes back and finds, all of my friends have been killed, basically.
Yes.
Wow.
And by the way, I want to point out something interesting about that, actually, is that when David said, it took like 3, 4, maybe even 5 years for Sulla to do that in the East. And that whole time Marius was busy, he obviously killed the people and said, okay, we're going to send armies after Sulla. The armies marched over to Sulla. All the soldiers said, you're the legal one, not Marius. And then they killed their officers and joined Sulla. Because when it comes down to it, the people actually do want law.
Yeah.
They do want what's legal.
Yeah, we know when we don't follow the established forms, protocols, and procedures. I mean, that's part of the Roman imperial cult was showing the importance of Roman traditions and institutions.
Exactly.
Because that kind of thing, I think, is naturally appealing to people. That's what gives government power legitimacy, is the fact that it's grounded in some kind of law. When that goes awry, I think you're absolutely right. People don't like it. Yeah. And, we've seen, we don't need to get too much into that today, but we've seen our share of current events where groups of people have not liked it, that established forms and protocols, legal protocols for transition of power have not been followed.
Right.
The consequences have not been great.
Right. That's exactly the point I was making. Right. Yeah. So Sulla finally comes back, kicks Marius out, and I think he kills him. I think Marius dies at this point.
Marius actually died shortly after Sulla left for the East. I know this because I've just been reading about this. He was an old man by this point already. He dies shortly after. His son and some of his, associates have been running things in the meantime. And but anyway.
Yeah, and like I said, Marius does one thing bad. Sulla finds a way to systematize it and bring it to a logical conclusion. When he gets back, first thing he does is what's called a prescription. So he makes a list of, I think, 9,000 names. Anyone whose name is on that list, if you turn them into the government for execution, you get to keep their money.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's sort of the worst kind of a bill of attainder.
Right. Yeah.
And fun fact.
Well, and I bet they have a lot of money. These probably aren't poor people that are on this list.
Yes. Yeah. And so, on that front, turns out it's pretty easy to bribe someone to add names to that list if you happen to think they've got some property you want. But also, fun fact, a teenage Julius Caesar was on that list until someone persuaded Sulla to take him off it, which he did very reluctantly.
Boy, that was a mistake. I bet that guy wouldn't live down. Who persuaded him to take him off?
I don't remember, or I don't even remember if we know, but Alex, you might have
if we know, I think it was a cousin that Sulla didn't want to kill, a cousin of Julius Caesar that Sulla didn't want to kill. So then Sulla said, "Okay, fine, I won't do it." Yeah. But anyways, the last thing that matters for Sulla, actually 2 points finally.
So just to be clear, Sulla takes power, takes it, basically, because it's been challenged, disputed in a way that's not legitimate. So when he gets back to Rome, he does a crackdown where he usurps power he doesn't necessarily have, even though he's been validly elected. And then, legitimately in office, but not legitimately exercising this power to kill all of his political opponents, basically. I'm going to prevent this kind of a coup from happening again.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
A lot of this sounds familiar, guys.
He does have the Senate make him dictator, and this was something interesting.
That's what I'm getting to.
Yeah, that's going to be, David, you spoiled the climax.
You spoiled the climax, yeah. You spoiled the climax, which, by the way, people, we're going like very fast through this. Sulla's one of my favorite people in all of history. Think like how cool. He's a bad guy, obviously, but think like, Darth Vader. Darth Vader's still cool, even though he's the bad guy. Sulla's a lot like that.
Yeah.
But anyways, when
he
when
paves
Sulla
the way
marches
for
Rome,
the entire empire, everything like that. It's actually for a while, Alex and I, we talked about making a show, pitching it to Netflix, because they'll let anybody pitch a show, even some attorneys and their legal assistants, pitching a show about the fall of the Roman Republic that's through the eyes of Cicero. and it begins during the dictatorship of Sulla. But yeah,
that
go
was
on.
so cool. Yeah. Anyways, when he marches back to Rome, convinces them at sword point in a very cool scene that involves murdering a bunch of people at the same time. Won't get into that. Murdering a bunch of prisoners of war. He convinces them to make him dictator, but he doesn't make him dictator the normal Roman office. I assume you guys have talked about that before.
We mentioned that dictator was an official office.
It's a
under Roman government.
It's a 6 month office where you can do whatever you want, and after the 6 months, you are not civilly liable for anything you did in it. Right. He doesn't do the normal office. Right. Mm-hmm. He doesn't do the normal office. He says, "Make me dictator for life." That's the other thing he does that's important.
Yeah. Well, and this is another thing I got from that book I was talking about. Normally, also, at least according to this book, when they made dictators previously, they usually sort of gave them a specific commission. It's, to do this, you have dictatorial powers to do X, Y, or Z. Mm-hmm. In his case, it just said to reform the laws of the Republic.
It was basically, so dictatorship was basically an authorizing order from the Senate that would allow you to accomplish a certain task, exercising the authority of the Senate and the people of Rome. Right. So rather than just acting as consul, you'd be acting on behalf of the entire Senate and people of Rome. So you had powers that were in excess of those usually exercised by the consul within the power delegated to you by the Senate. So it had to have some kind of intelligible principle, kind of like delegation of congressional authority to the executive now.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
Reform the laws of Rome is not an intelligible principle.
No.
An intelligible principle is like create a system of national parks or regulate clean air quality to make sure that people have breathable air, like that sort of thing. Not
in the case of the most famous Roman dictator, who was Cincinnatus, they would, win the war for us. Take
and that was usually where it was used because we, as we mentioned before, the civilian and the military power overlap in Rome. So consul is oftentimes directing the activities of the military, and you don't want his hands to be tied in doing that. Mm-hmm. So dictatorship kind of exists as a way to facilitate more military flexibility.
Right. So anyway, Sulla becomes a dictator of Rome, for life. He becomes a dictator for life, uses it to pass a bunch of legislation that he thinks will make it so someone like Marius can never happen again. Because again, Sulla likes law, but if someone else is going to be breaking the law to get advantage, he's going to do it too. That's sort of his position. Interesting about...
he'll sink to the level of whatever his lowest competitor is.
Right, in order to win. Yeah, exactly. As soon as he gets all those laws passed, he retires after 2 years instead of taking the whole lifetime. And because of what the dictatorship is, no one can prosecute him.
Yeah.
Because they all respect the rule of law. And even though he's grossly exceeded the office, it was something that the Senate had voted for him to be able to do. Yeah. So what are they going to do about it?
Right. Now, you can imagine how much people like someone who marched in with an army and said, you're going to use these laws or else. After Sulla died, within around 10 years, all of his laws are gone. So whether or not those would have fixed Rome, we don't know, because the people said, I'm not keeping laws that were forced at me at gunpoint.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the broader point here, is laws that are passed in that manner can't be good laws. It doesn't really matter what their content or their substance is, right? Because that which is arrived at by just means is just. Mm-hmm. You cannot have justice if it's not brought about by just means. People will never accept it, and I think that rightly so.
Right. Yeah. And, if he proved anything, he proved that a man with military talent and loyal soldiers could basically do what he wanted.
Right.
That would be a principle that would...
And there are people,
bad.
Young people who are sitting there who are taking notes on all of this.
Including Pompey, who served as a junior officer in the Civil War after Sulla arrived back in Italy and sort of made his name that way. And, we're going to be eliding a lot of history here. But the main point is the pattern has been set at this point.
Right.
At some point, it'd be worth doing a podcast just telling the story, because we're trying to get out sort of the legal conclusions to draw from the fall of Rome, which sometimes the story falls by the wayside as we're doing that. But if Netflix won't give us our show, we ought to do that at some point.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people they know a lot more about Caesar and Pompey. They've never really heard about Sulla, and
that's kind of the important part, because you don't get a Caesar without a Sulla. Right. There's just no way that's imaginable.
Yeah, the stuff that Caesar and Pompey did were already established by either Gracchus, Marius, or Sulla. They were just better at it, frankly. They just did it.
They'd seen it done once.
They've seen it done once. They found a better way to do it, so they did it more fantastically. But they didn't actually have any changes to their system of gaining power.
Well, that's the thing, is stability is something that is very much dependent upon public perception.
Mm-hmm.
So once people have seen exactly how far the system can bend under certain pressure, it's very easy to push the system to that point again, and then to push it past that point.
Right.
That's why you really can't allow an inch on this stuff. You got to make sure that you maintain the rule of law in every circumstance, or you're going to lose the fabric of your society.
Right.
Yeah. So, to make what could be and probably should be in a different world, a much longer story, quick and digestible. Pompey, similarly to Sulla, sort of has this brilliant military career fighting in the East.
Military careers sort of help your popularity.
Yes. And at this point, that principle I was talking about earlier, where, any general with the loyalty of his men is basically running the show politically.
Right.
That becomes all the more clear in Pompey's case, because he conquers all this territory in the East, and he basically just makes whatever treaties he wants with, he sets up a new king of Israel, all this stuff, and then he goes home and just tells the Senate, you should ratify all the stuff I did. And they do.
Right.
And
yeah, because they like new territory.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
it's
also...
even Thomas Jefferson, one of the original small government guys, strict constructionist with our Constitution, even he can't resist the urge to expand territory. And I think he made the right decision on that.
Yeah, at least Jefferson admitted it, though.
Yeah, and I think he made the right decision on that. And, Jefferson, to his credit, said, I may have acted in a manner that exceeds my power. Impeach me if I did.
Yeah,
and
that's what I mean by That's what I mean by at least he admits it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think he, because Congress is supposed to ratify treaties. I think he has every right to purchase something and have Congress ratify it. But it's certainly at the peripheries of his authority.
Fair enough.
In Pompey's case also, turns out a great general with the loyalty of most of the veteran soldiers in your country, hard man to say no to.
Yes.
And so,
he makes you an offer you can't refuse.
Yeah. He basically becomes the man in Rome. Julius Caesar, who's a bit younger, sort of reaches a compromise with Pompey and another guy named Crassus, who is famously extremely rich.
Famously crass?
No, rich.
No. Anyway, Crassus, in search of military glory, because that's increasingly important, gets his head chopped off in over his head in a battle.
In over his head.
Yeah. I didn't even mean to make that.
That was real good.
Guys, I will say, actually, that's a good point. If there's one thing that Pompey and Caesar actually did add to the whole list of how to gain power, it's conspiracy, because they joined as allies together and with Crassus in order to give all three of them political power and armies, which is why they were able to march off. Caesar did one thing in Gaul, Pompey did something else in the East, then Crassus got his head chopped off.
There were conspiracies going on before that, too. Like there's the whole Catiline conspiracy. And
sure, that's true.
That's probably a story for another time as well. But
yeah, it's so they combined tactics that had been used by various figures in the past.
So anyway, with Crassus out of the way, though, it's basically Caesar and Pompey duking it out for who's really running the show.
Mm-hmm.
Caesar, in another theme that we sort of touched on, his term in office is running out as governor. He needs to get a new office, or the Senate's going to want to cut him down to size. He's getting too powerful, and it turns out a great way to do that is to prosecute him for all the bribery he used to do, among other illegal things.
And this is during a big anti-corruption push too. Anti-corruption's been popular in about the decade leading up to this, so we're going to use the popular charge against him.
Yeah. When they won't give him another office, though, he copies the Sulla playbook exactly and shows up in Italy with an army.
Well, that's the interesting part, is that he doesn't quite... It's not that they won't give him another office. It's that they think, oh, we're being sneaky. They pass a law that says you're not allowed to run for office unless you are physically in Rome and give up your army, which, like Alex said before, everyone else was just standing in their head of their army saying, make me president. They say, if you want to be consul, you have to get rid of your army. He knows if he does that, they're just going to arrest him and execute him. So he says, no, I'm not going to bother doing that. I'm just going to march to Rome.
I'm going to cross the Rubicon. But he's not the first guy to cross the Rubicon. Just the first guy since they created this law?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
law's been around for what? Like maybe 40, 50 years at this point?
Like 4.
Like 4 years.
Yeah, like I said, they specifically passed it in order to hurt him. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is a quote from that same book. Again, it's called SPQR by Mary Beard. Mm-hmm. I thought this put it very well. She says, when Sulla turned his army on the city, all but one of his senior officers had refused to follow him. When Caesar did the same, all but one stayed with him.
Yep.
And that's
because it's been done before now.
That's a perfect way to sum it up, actually.
That really is. Once it's been done before, it's gone. I mean, Blackstone puts this very, very well in his commentaries. You can, even in legal interpretation, you can point to traditional interpretation of something, you can point to established practice, but it only takes once for that practice not to have been followed for that whole argument to break down.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys talk about it a lot, precedent, but it's pretty hard to overestimate just how important precedent is in all of these things.
Yeah,
like
whether legal
general life.
precedent or otherwise. I think people, I don't want to confuse anybody because people oftentimes just assume the fact that a case has gone a particular way in the past means it's going to bind in the future. Sure. There's two different senses of precedent we're talking about. But yeah, whether it's legal precedent or otherwise, very influential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we're talking, this is grounded in human psychology, I think, the importance of precedent, but I think there's good reason why precedent's very influential. One of the very most important things for the law to do is to establish patterns and norms for regularity in human interaction. We want things to work the same way tomorrow that they work today.
Yeah.
You need precedent to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Julius Caesar, obviously we all know he's assassinated. And
yeah, he's made dictator.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then
again for life.
A whole lot more.
Again for life, yeah.
The famous scene in the Shakespeare play where he refuses the laurel 3 times, then he takes it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having been done once was bad enough. Having been done twice, this is basically a permanently entrenched pattern of political violence in Rome.
Right.
And it's all downhill until Caesar's nephew and legal heir becomes the first official Roman emperor.
Which at this point, you can blame Augustus for the transition into empire, but I hope we've laid out the case here. He really had no other choice. Mm-hmm. The system had disintegrated.
This is just how it works from that point on.
It's very hard to put the brakes on this stuff once it starts going. It's got a lot of inertia. Mm-hmm. You can slow it down, and I really think, part of why we play this out is there's a lot of doom and gloom when people talk about our republic, the American Republic, talking about how, we're past the point of no return. We've got all this stuff's going on, that there's no way we can maintain or preserve our republic. I don't think that's true. We've had an orderly transfer of power for every single new president that we've had. We've never had anything like this go down. There's never been a single military coup. Our one civil war, which was, that was bloody atrocity. I think there were tons of war crimes that went on in that civil war, but we were able to restore the Union peaceably afterward. We restored the southern states as states with full representation. They had problems in their elections after that, with North trying to influence them and so on and so forth. And I think we're still feeling a lot of that to this day. I don't want to say that our system hasn't been dealt blows, but it's nothing like what we've seen at the end of the Roman Republic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The point that I want to make is if we don't put the brakes on what we see as runaway government now,
mm-hmm.
it's going to be very hard to put them on later.
Yep.
All right, Alex, anything else you want to say before? I know you got to go pretty soon. So
no, I think that's it. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Come back anytime. All right, David, what else we got for today?
Well, we've used most of the time we had budgeted for this episode already, so I think it may be time just to go into everybody's favorite segment.
All right, gather around, folks, young and old, shy and bold, rich and poor, anybody interested in craziness of laws throughout the world and in America in particular. Join us once more for another segment of Captain Kangaroo Court.
All right, well, we do have a little more time for this segment than we normally would. So let's see how many topics we can cover here. I've got a few ready for us.
Remember, stick around after this segment because we do have some announcements about season 2 of this podcast. You're going to want to hear those.
That's right. And our always wildly popular disclaimers.
Yes, the best part of all.
Mm-hmm. So, a Texas appeals court has rejected a lawyer's argument that his colleague can't be sanctioned for aggressive and even unkind comments if there was no interference with justice and, quote, we're just mean people.
What?
So,
his argument was that we're just mean people?
Basically, yes. And, I think the specifics actually get a little too convoluted. I love that phrase.
I saw something about watching porn on a state computer there.
Yeah, so that's what it comes out. I think that was the specific comment he made that really put it over the top. But basically, he was upset with this one particular judge for what he perceived to be, bad judging, basically, and he went on a kind of a campaign of insults toward the employees of that particular court, including accusing one of them of infecting a bunch of computers with malware for viewing some inappropriate content on a work computer.
All right.
But yeah.
Okay, then.
He didn't represent himself in after he was he was sanctioned for this, but his partner basically made the argument, we weren't actually, we didn't disrupt any real processes. Nothing actually went wrong because of this. And you can't be mad at us just because we're mean people. That was
probably depends what the state's ethics rules say.
I think that's probably a good bet.
Lots of states have rules of decorum that lawyers are supposed to follow, whether or not it interferes with justice.
It reminds me, this is almost an exact parallel with a joke by the comedian John Mulaney, who, says he used to have a drinking problem, so he quit drinking, but he regretted that deprived him of the best excuse that he had, because he could no longer say, I'm sorry, I drank too much last night. He could only say, I'm sorry, I'm mean and loud.
Yeah, pretty much.
Anyway, so next for Captain Kangaroo Court, got another headline. Judge observes that suspect in anti-Semitic attack, quote, has removed his pants to show the court his backside. And you may...
So he said, for the record, please let the record reflect that the witness has removed his pants to show his backside, I suppose.
Something like that. Because it's Judge Regina Thomas, evidently. And you may be wondering exactly why anyone would feel compelled to say this out loud. Turns out it's because it was a remote hearing happening by Zoom.
Well, either way, you'd want it on the record. So
yes,
that's important testimony.
Yeah. So evidently, this guy, while presumably standing in front of a computer, flipped the bird, turned around, and mooned the camera, according to the Detroit Free Press. The judge said he has now removed his pants to show the court his backside. I'm putting him in a waiting room, and then remarked, I don't know why anyone would think it's appropriate for them to pull their pants down and show the court they're behind.
He probably didn't think that it was appropriate. He probably thought that it was an insult.
Yeah.
And that was probably the intent there. And you probably could have found him in contempt for that. That seems like directly contemptuous of the court.
You'd think, in a very colloquial sense, in addition to the legal sense.
Yes.
I believe you could regard that as a display of contempt for the court. I
believe you could, David.
Mm-hmm. All right. Moving on. We're going through these rapid fire. Next up. Nicotine addiction costs vaping trial lawyer more than $2,100.
Is everything just going to be disciplinary stuff now, David?
Well, the next one may have a bit more substance for you. We'll be able to get into a bit of detail about what does and does not constitute a frivolous lawsuit. But
so when the judge told him to stop vaping in the courtroom, he just wouldn't do it, or what?
Well, here's the interesting thing. They didn't know he was vaping at the time. They discovered him vaping on the security tapes. And so what I find really interesting is that they, this fine he was ordered to pay, broken down, they itemize it for us in this article. $300 for each day that he was vaping in the courtroom, which that's 6 days, so $1,800. They also fined him $93 for time it took the court personnel to review the video footage. So that's being factored in.
That doesn't seem fair. They only caught him because they were reviewing it.
Yep.
He would have preferred they not do that.
Yep. And also, he had to pay attorney's fees to the opposing lawyer. I assume that's to compensate the opposing attorney's clients for the time that lawyer was there while this guy was vaping. But that added another.
Wait, was he took a recess so he could vape, or what's
I believe so.
What's
yes.
the rationale for attorney's fees? That doesn't make any sense.
I think that's why. It doesn't go into a lot of detail, but
okay.
Anyway, for a total bill of $2,143.
That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Don't vape in court, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's probably the lesson to be taken from there. All right, and finally, this one will not be disciplinary. You have my word.
Good. There's just not much to say about those. It's just kind of sad,
Well, the hope is that it's funny, but
yeah, I guess in one way of looking at it.
A Florida woman. We've talked about Florida man, but I think this is the first time Florida woman has come up. Yeah.
Maybe that's his wife.
I think in the lore, that would probably be the case. Has filed a federal lawsuit alleging that the Kraft company misled consumers by claiming that its instant mac and cheese is ready in 3.5 minutes. And
is it not?
The suit specifies.
Although I see right on the box there, it says ready in 3.5 minutes. So they certainly said that. But.
The would-be class action suit, this article says, claims that the 3.5 minute represents the time to microwave the product, which is only one of 4 steps. They didn't factor in the time it takes to
pouring in the packet,
remove
and
the
water.
lid, remove the lid and cheese sauce pouch, add water to the cup and stir, and after microwaving, stir in the cheese sauce. Consumers will also learn that the cheese sauce will, quote, thicken upon standing, all of which adds up in excess of that 3.5 minutes. Now,
to like maybe 4 minutes at the outside.
Depends. I've found back in the days when I used to make instant mac and cheese on occasion, it's been years, probably since my undergrad days now, since I have. I think they tell you to add a little too much water. And so actually that stand to thicken takes longer than you might think.
Well, that's not what she's suing over.
That's true.
She's not suing over incorrect instructions. She's suing over the amount of time it takes.
Yeah. Maybe all I'm saying is maybe if they told you to use less water, that, thickening process.
I hate to admit this. I really hate to admit this.
Mm-hmm.
But she is right. It's not ready in 3.5 minutes.
That was my question. So, Kraft, probably predictably, is claiming that this is a frivolous lawsuit.
The problem, and it kind of is, because what's the difference between 3.5 minutes and 4 minutes, or 4.5 at the outside? But it says 3.5 minutes.
Yeah. So, is there enough to go on here? I'm not going to say is there enough to win the case, because obviously...
I think there's enough to win the case. I think it's a pretty clear breach of contract.
Fascinating. So
that's an implied contract when you buy the mac and cheese, is that it's ready in 3.5 minutes, but it in fact isn't.
Yeah. All right,
and I think the strongest argument there is the let it sit to thicken part of it, because, presumably you could do the rest of that. I don't think there's any way conceivably that a human being could do it, but you could do it in the blink of an eye if you were one of those superheroes that goes super fast.
A negligible amount of time.
Right.
Certainly, if you've got quick enough reflexes, sure.
The only required time there is the 3.5 minutes, but if it says let sit to thicken,
yeah.
Even if that's for a matter of seconds, the task can't physically, I'm not even talking physically possible here, but it can't even conceivably be completed in 3.5 minutes, because the let sit to thicken is not something it's doing while in the microwave. So.
Yeah, I was curious whether they have an asterisk or something next to the ready in 3.5 minutes, and it does not look like they do on that packaging. So
no, it doesn't even say ready 3.5. You could say hot in 3.5 minutes, or
cooks in 3.5 minutes, maybe.
It doesn't say that.
So you're telling me that you are on Florida Woman's side on this one?
I don't want to be. I wouldn't take the case. I think it's really stupid. But
you're telling me there's something there, though.
But I don't. Yeah, she seems right.
Yeah, that's these are the things that we do this for. This is why Captain Kangaroo Court exists, to see if we can generate some new legal questions.
Yeah, if I were the attorney on the opposing side of that, if I were the attorney for Velveeta or Kraft, I guess owns
Kraft,
Velveeta.
as the parent company.
Yeah, I would say that food preparation is commonly and colloquially that's the term that's used to refer to cooking something. Any reasonable person reading this would understand that we're referring to the cooking time here. I'm not actually convinced by that, though.
Yeah,
because it says ready in 3.5 minutes.
See, this is the hard hitting reporting on legal news that we do here.
If a statute said something like that, you'd have to interpret it by what it said. I think it's fair if the same standards apply to contracts. I hope so. I've said before, damages are separate from liability. Kraft may be liable here. I think she gets a penny in damage.
Yeah.
I mean, as a class action, everybody's ever bought one of those things. I think maybe each of us are entitled to a penny, which probably adds up to some obscene amount of money. But
yeah, very possible,
I don't think there's any damages here, because the difference between 3.5 minutes and 4.5 minutes at the outside, I guess if you have a really high billable hourly rate, say you bill $1,000 an hour, what is that? What's a minute of your time worth, David? 1,000 divided by 60?
Somewhere around 30.
$30?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, that's
right?
way too much.
I could be doing
way
my
too
math
much
wrong
for
here.
this lawsuit.
All right, 16 2/3. So I roughly doubled it.
That's still
actually,
way
but,
too much. Way too much. That's
Well, I think what one thing to bear in mind is if the added
if they're
time
making
is,
this at all, they valued their time at whatever the price of this mac and cheese is. So
yeah. Well, and if the added time is mostly time that it's just sitting there, you can go do other stuff while that happens. You don't actually need to be,
What if it makes you a minute late for an appointment? Now that everything's on Zoom, that's actually conceivable. You might budget 3.5. Why am I making this lady's case for her? I don't think it's a good case. I don't think she should have brought it. Yeah, maybe they technically are liable. That's
yeah. Anyway, I think that's it for Captain Kangaroo Court, though.
All right. Okay. So thanks again, folks. Once again, everybody's learned about our eccentricities and crazy ideas in our law, even crazy lawsuits about mac and cheese. So join us once again next week, or really probably next year, for Captain Kangaroo Court. All right. So finally, the segment you guys have been waiting for this whole episode: announcements about next year's season.
Yeah. So first off, this is going to be the last episode for this year, what we're going to be calling season 1 of the podcast.
Yeah, you guys don't need legal news through Christmas season,
Yeah.
whatever other holidays you celebrate. You can go do that stuff with your family. You don't need legal news.
Yeah. And we expect to be back sometime around February. There's also going to be some
Part
changes.
of that's to accommodate my court calendar as well. I've got a lot of trials coming up in January, right back to back. And if you know lawyers, they don't like doing other stuff while they're in trial.
Yeah.
So rather than find a stand-in, we've decided to just delay the new season. So
Yeah.
It's more anticipation, right? So you guys
Exactly.
are going to have to wait on the edge of your seats for our first episode. Do we know the topic of that first episode yet, David?
I don't think we're ready to reveal that at this time.
Ooh, exciting. All right, so you guys are going to have to wait to get that information coming up.
Yeah, but it will be, we're going to be focusing more on political philosophy, sort of fundamental things to do with the American system, with other systems by contrast, less sort of news-oriented, less topically oriented.
Yeah, so we've been told our most popular segments, well, I guess our most popular segment overall was the French, what did we call that one? The
Summer of the Revolution.
The Summer of the Revolution. Yeah, that was very, very popular. So we're going to be doing a lot more content like that. Things where we actually look at, how does this really work when you get down and look at it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is we are going to announce subjects ahead of time. So probably a week prior to each podcast, we'll be telling you what the subject is so that you can look forward to and you can know whether it's one that you care about, one that you want to listen to. And because they're going to be more broadly philosophical and less based on news, although don't worry, we'll still be recapping legal news. You'll still know what's happening in the Supreme Court, still know all of that. But the focus is just going to be this more structural, philosophical bent. But because of that, I think they're going to be a little bit more timeless. So if you miss an episode or two, don't worry about it. You can listen to the ones that have things you care about.
Also, as we mentioned in passing, we are planning to make more content from the podcast available as video, so you can check that out on our YouTube channel once we reboot for season 2.
It's going to be great. I'm really excited for it. Looking forward to season 2. If you enjoyed season 1 of this podcast, I think you'll like season 2 even more. If you didn't like season 1, you'll still like season 2. I promise it. There's a satisfaction guaranteed. In fact, every penny you paid for this podcast will be returned to you if you don't like season 2.
I just pray that we never switch to a 4-pay model in the future.
Yeah, then I can't say stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, but if you liked it, recommend it to your friends. Anybody that, you talked to that guy last week, he just didn't know the first thing about the Constitution. Teach him better. Tell him about our podcast.
Send him to us. Yeah.
And tell him about our matching grant that continues to the end of the year.
Yeah, thank you. All right. And with that, as we also promised, our most popular segment, our disclaimers.
Here you go, folks.
Please note that nothing in this podcast constitutes legal advice, and all of the opinions expressed are the opinions of the individuals expressing them, not necessarily the opinions of the Lex Rex Institute.
The Lex Rex Institute is a nonprofit constitutional advocacy organization. If you'd like to learn a bit more about our organization's activities or make a donation, please visit our website, www.lexrex.org, LEXREX.org.
As a reminder, this podcast is a legal issues podcast, not a political issues podcast. We try to keep our commentary strictly to legal issues. Today, now that more issues are considered political than ever before, we believe it's especially important to distinguish between the two.
Thanks for listening to the Lex Rex Institute podcast.